Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Gaming. Today we're going to continue on with our AI in our third-person cover shooter. So today I'm going to start out in our enemy AI behavior tree. So far we have a sequence for when our character is in the guard state. We have a sequence when we are in the patrol state. And now we need to start dealing with what happens when our character moves into the combat state. Of course, we have the three branches from our combat state for the assault, the cover, and the heavy. And I'm going to start dealing with the assault sequence first. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to right-click and I'm going to break the links for our assault sequence. And from our combat selector, I'm going to drag off. And I'm going to search for a simple parallel. And what a simple parallel is going to do is it has the purple tab on it, along with the gray tab that the other nodes have. A simple parallel will run a task off of the purple node, as well as running off a sequence or other series of events from the gray tab. So I'm actually going to grab the gray tab and I'm going to drag it down to our assault sequence right now. And then I want to move the decorator to our simple parallel. So I'm just going to click and drag the assault decorator, and I'm going to drag it onto our simple parallel, and that will move it over to that node. And the way I want the assault node to work is that the enemy, when it spots the player, is going to continually move at the player. It's going to get into a certain range where he's going to stop, and he's going to perpetually fire his weapon at our player character. And then if the player character starts moving away, once it gets past a certain distance, he'll start pursuing our player once again. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to set up our attack node, but this is going to be a little bit empty for now because we don't actually have anything to attack our player with yet. So first I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on New Task, and we're going to base it off of the BTT task blueprint base. And I'm going to go ahead and right click, and we're going to search for Execute. And we're going to select the Event Receive Execute AI. Now, I don't really have anything in here as of yet to put. So I'm going to go back to our main window, and I'm going to rename this task. And we'll call it Attack Player _ BTT. And we're going to go back into our behavior tree. And from the purple node on our simple parallel, I'm going to drag off. And I'm going to select the Attack Player BTT. And I'm just going to simply name the node Attack Player. Now, from the parallel, what we are going to want to do is we want to move towards our player's character. So I'm going to drag off of this sequence. And under Tasks, we're going to grab the Move To. And we want to set up the details in here. The acceptable radius, I'm going to set to 300, which, if we remember from previous instances, the units of measure are in centimeters. So this is going to move them to about 3 meters away from our player. And we want to make sure that the blackboard key is set to our player character. So we're going to go ahead and save. And let's give this a test. So I'll go ahead and hit play. And we see our character patrolling around, so we're going to get in his vision when he turns around, and he sees us, and he moves directly towards us, and he stops 3 meters away. Now, the one weird thing you're going to notice is if you start moving away from him, he is going to hold that specific distance from us. So we can essentially kite the enemy around the map, which we don't necessarily want to do. So we're going to go back into our behavior tree. And on our Move To node, I'm going to go ahead, right-click, and add a decorator. And I'm going to select the Is At Location decorator. And I'm going to select the Is At Location decorator. And I'm going to set the acceptable radius to 700, which will be 7 meters. And we want to check inverse condition. And we want to make sure the blackboard key is the player character. So what this is going to do is when it comes down to fire the sequence off, it's going to check to see if we're at the specific location. Now, we hit the inverse, so it's going to see if we're within 7 meters of the player character, And if we're not within 7 meters of the character, it's going to go ahead and execute this task to move to. So once again, let's save and we'll test it out. And we can also test out shooting the enemy to see if he reacts. So he turns around when we shoot him, and he moves to 3 meters away. And if we start backing away, he doesn't stop moving, or he doesn't start moving until we get at least a certain distance away from him. So we'll go back into the behavior tree. And the other thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and set how fast he moves when he's in the assault mode. Now, since he's moving perpetually and firing the weapon, I would imagine that the enemy is going to move slower, and this is going to give our player a chance to actually kind of evade the enemy character. So we're going to create a new task that is going to change the speed of movement for our enemy. So I'm going to go up to New Task. We're going to do it off of our blueprint base. And I'm going to go back and rename this. And we're going to call this set move speed underscore BTT. And we'll go back to our behavior tree. And we'll go ahead and drag off of our sequence, and under tasks, we're going to select the set move speed BTT. So we'll go into our set move task, and we're going to go ahead and right click and search for the event receive execute AI. And we want to set the maximum walk speed on the enemy character. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off the controlled pawn, and we're going to get the movement component. But our enemy character is a character and not a pawn. So we're going to drag off of the return value here, and we're going to go ahead and cast to the character movement component. And we'll plug that in. And from our cast, we're going to drag out, and we're going to search for set max walk speed. And we'll plug that in. And we want him to move about half as fast, so I'm going to set this number to 250. But I want to have this be a multi-function node, so in case we need to use it for something else, we can set the max walk speed to other values. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on max walk speed, and I'm going to promote it to a variable, and I'm going to call it max walk speed. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the I to make it public. And then finally, after we set the max walk speed, we're going to go ahead and call a finish execute. And we want to check the success box to be true. And that's going to be it for setting our move speed. So we're going to go ahead and compile and save. And we're going to go back over to our behavior tree. And if we click on our set move speed here, you'll see that we have a variable that is exposed to us, the max walk speed. So we can actually set this value here in the behavior tree. And I'm just going to set the node name to set walk speed. So we're going to go ahead and save this, and we'll go ahead and test it out. So I'll hit play. We'll get his attention by shooting at him. And then he's going to come over to us. And he is moving at about half speed, so our player has enough speed to, in their regular movement, get away from the enemy character. Now keep in mind the enemy character is going to be shooting at us this entire time. And you'll notice that he's kind of sliding around on the ground. His animation doesn't actually match his movement speed. And we're going to take care of that at a later time. So we're just going to leave that for now. And now we're going to actually set up our enemy character to handle a couple different things. So I'm going to go back into our enemy character folder and open our base enemy character blueprint. So one thing you'll notice is whenever we set our combat status, we're doing the same exact thing every time. we're getting our combat status variable, checking to see if it's equal to combat, and then using a not operator into a branch. Then we're casting to our player character, setting the player character, and finally setting our combat status. So I'm going to go ahead and off of one of the pawn sensing here, I'm going to go ahead and select all of those nodes. And I'm going to go and right click and select collapse to function. And I'm going to name this function set to combat. And if we open up our set to combat, you'll see that it basically plopped all of those nodes into this function. Now it has the one input that's object, and this is a reference to either the instigator or the pawn. So I'm going to rename this input to sensed pawn. And we'll go ahead and compile that. And we can go ahead and replace all these other nodes here with our set to combat function. And we just need to plug the instigator into the sensed pawn. And we can do that up here as well. So now when we take damage, when we on C pawn or on here noise, it will go ahead and perform the set to combat function. Next, I'm going to go ahead and go over to our construction script. And right here, we are switching on our combat status to whether or not the waypoints are visible. So I'm going to drag this off to the side here. And from our construction script, I'm going to go ahead and add in a sequence. And I'm going to want to do a couple of different things aside from setting the visibility. I actually want the weapon that the enemy is carrying to be based off of what their combat type is. So we're going to go up to the Components tab up here, and we're going to click on Add Component, and we're going to search for a skeletal mesh. The weapons that we are using are skeletal meshes. If you're using a custom weapon that isn't a skeletal mesh, you can just use a static mesh in place. And I'm going to call this our weapon mesh. And I'm going to go ahead and drag it and drop it on the mesh that is the skeletal mesh for our character. And then to the right, underneath mesh here, I'm going to set this to the assault rifle as the default. But we want this to change based on what the combat type is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab our combat type and drag it out onto our graph here. And from our combat type, I'm going to search for a switch. And we're going to select the switch on combat type enum. And we're going to connect our then one into the switch. And what this is going to do is it'll give us different options based on whether he's an assault character or cover character or a heavy character. And what we want to do in this case is we want to drag out a reference to our weapon mesh. And I'm going to drag off from our weapons mesh, and we're going to search for set skeletal mesh. And I'm going to make 3 copies of this, one for each different option on the switch here. So I'll connect assault up to the first one, cover to the second, and heavy to the third. And then connect our weapon mesh into each one. So if we're an assault type character, I want the weapon to be a shotgun. So I'm going to go ahead and search for the shotgun. When our character is in cover, I want him to have the assault rifle. So I'm going to select the assault rifle. And then finally, when we are coming from the heavy, I want him to have the grenade launcher. So I'll select the grenade launcher. Now we want to go ahead and actually attach our mesh onto our enemy character. So I'm going to add a new pin. And then I'm going to grab our weapon mesh here. And I'm going to drag off of our weapon mesh. And I'm going to search for attach to. And I'm going to drag out our characters mesh and plug it into the in parent. And we'll connect our then to our attach to. And then for the in socket name, we're going to use the name of the socket that we use to hold the weapon. So in this case, it is going to be the weapon socket. We want the attach type to snap to target, keep world scale, and weld simulated bodies is checked. And this will go ahead and attach the weapon to our character for us. So if we actually go into the viewport and we compile, we'll see that the weapon is actually attached to the character. And if we go into our class defaults, and we go up to our default variables up here, if we change it from assault to cover, it will actually change the weapon that is equipped on the character. So I'll set it back to assault. And we'll go back to our construction script. And then to actually fire the weapon, I'm going to go ahead to our components tab and I'm going to add another component. And I'm going to search for arrow. And I'm going to call this muzzle arrow. And then I'm going to drag this and drop it onto the weapon mesh so that it is parented to it. And then I'm going to add another pin. And then we want to drag out our muzzle arrow here. And we want to attach to. And we want to attach it to the weapon mesh. And we'll go ahead and connect our then 3 to our attach to. And the socket name is going to be the socket on the muzzle. So I'll type in muzzle. Once again, we want to snap to target, keep world scale. And then I'll just clean up this graph a little bit. And so we can go ahead and compile and save. And if we go into the viewport, we'll notice that there is now a arrow that is attached to the muzzle of the weapon. And we're going to actually use this arrow to determine where the weapon fires to. So I'm going to go back into our event graph. And we're going to need some events to take care of firing our weapon. So I'm going to right click and we're going to add a custom event. And I'm going to name this custom event Fire Weapon. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a second custom event. And I'm going to call this Stop Fire Weapon. And then for our fire weapon here, the first thing we want to actually do is check to see if our character is dead. Now at this point, when we end up killing our character, we're just automatically destroying our actor. But eventually we're going to have a ragdoll effect that's going to take some time to perform. And we don't want a fire weapon custom event coming through when our character is dead. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a branch to check to see if our character is dead first or not. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our combat type and we're going to get it. And we're going to go ahead and search for a switch again. So we'll switch on combat type enum and we'll plug this into the true. And from here, we can actually tell it to perform different events based on the combat type. So I'm going to move down in the graph here, and we're going to add in a new event for each one of these. So we're going to right-click, add custom event, and I'm going to call this one Fire Shotgun. We'll add another one further down. I'm going to call this Fire Rifle. And then down again, I'm going to right click, custom event, and I'm going to call this Fire grenade launcher. And then back up at our switch here, we can drag off the assault and search for the fire shotgun. And then from the cover, we can search for the fire rifle. And from our heavy, we can search for the fire grenade launcher. So when we receive the fire weapon event, it's going to check to see if we're dead, and then based on what our combat type is set as, it's going to go ahead and fire the respective weapon. So since we're dealing with our assault character first, we're going to deal with firing the shotgun. And I'm going to go ahead and drag the fire rifle and the fire grenade launcher out of the way for now. And from our fire shotgun, we actually want to fire the weapon. So I'm going to right click and create another custom event. And I'm going to call this shotgun burst. And then from our fire shotgun, I'm going to drag out, and we're going to call that shotgun burst. And then what we're going to do is similar to the way we set up our automatic fire from our player's weapon, we're going to go ahead and set a timer by event. And then I'm going to grab the event node here and plug it into our shotgun burst. And I'm going to set the time to 1. And we want to check looping to true. And then from our return value here, I'm going to right click and promote to a variable. And I'm going to call this timer handle. So what we're doing here is when the enemy character gets the prompt to fire the weapon, he will go ahead and switch based on his weapon, and it will call the fire shotgun. So it will actually perform the shotgun burst, and then it will assign a timer to fire the shotgun burst every 1 second. Now to handle our shotgun burst here, I'm going to go ahead and create another variable, and I'm going to call this fire count. And this is going to be an integer. And what this is going to do is it's going to track how many times the weapon has actually fired. So first we want to check this value, and I'm going to go ahead and get our fire count. And we want to check to see if it is less than. And for my purposes, I'm going to make him fire in bursts of 3 before he pauses. So I'm going to put in the number 3. We'll throw in a branch and connect it to our event. And if this is true, we're going to go ahead and grab the weapon mesh. And we want to go ahead and play the animation of firing. So we'll search for play animation. And we'll connect our true into the play animation. And we're going to select the shotgun firing. So we'll select fire shotgun. And now the way the shotgun is going to fire is it's going to fire like a buckshot or a birdshot type of thing where it's going to fire out several pellets that are going to go into a spread. So we need to keep track of how many pellets are going to be fired. So I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call this shotgun burst count. And I'm going to go ahead and get our shotgun burst count. And from our play animation here, we're going to drag off, and we're going to search for a for loop. And it will have this first index and our last index. So I'll connect our shotgun burst count into the last index, and we'll set the first index to 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and compile, and then I'm going to select our shotgun burst count here, and we're going to set this to, let's say, 5. So it's going to fire out 5 individual pellets from the muzzle of the weapon. The next thing we're going to have to do is calculate the spawn transforms for the actual projectiles. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new function, and I'm going to call this function calculate shotgun fire. And we aren't going to need any inputs, but we are going to need an output. So I'm going to add the new output. And I'm going to call this projectile spawn info. And the type is going to be a transform. And we'll just drag this off out of the way. And this is where we're going to go ahead and use our arrow. So I'm going to drag out the reference to our muzzle arrow. And we want to go ahead and get the world location. And we also want to get the forward vector. Now, from our projectile spawn information, I'm going to go ahead and drag out, and we want to select Make Transform. So we're going to do the same thing that we did when calculating the shooting information for our player's weapon. We're going to create a transform that is going to spawn the weapon and point it in the right direction. So we can simply connect the Get World Location to the location. And we're going to want the rotation to be set based on a cone coming out from the end of the weapon. So from the Get Forward Vector here, I'm going to drag out, and I'm going to search for a random unit vector in cone. And what this is going to do is we give it a cone half angle, and it's going to calculate a random forward vector within that cone. Now, the cone half angle here, it's important to note that this number is in radians and not degrees. So if we do the math, I figured that at 10 meters out, the weapon should have a 1 meter radius spread. So if we take the ACOS of 1 over 10, we're going to get something like 1.00017. And then I'm going to go ahead and right-click on this and promote it to a variable. And I'm going to call this the shotgun spread. And then we're going to need to get the rotation from this vector. So I'm going to drag off, and I'm going to search for rotation from, and we're going to select the rotation from the X vector. And we're going to plug the rotation into the rotation input on our Make Transform. So basically, we're taking the arrow on the muzzle, we're getting its location, and that's the location that we're going to spawn our projectile. We're getting its forward vector, and we're calculating a forward vector based on a random unit within a cone moving from that vector. And then we're using the rotation from that vector to assign the rotation to the transform. So we're going to go ahead and compile and save this. And we can close it and go back to our event graph. So from our loop body here, we're going to go ahead and call on our calculate shotgun fire. And from our calculate shotgun fire, we're going to drag off. And we're going to go ahead and spawn an actor. And we want to select spawn actor from class. And we're going to set the class to be our shotgun projectile, which we don't actually have yet. So we're going to have to go ahead and make one. So I'm going to go back to our main window, and I'm going to go into our weapons and our projectiles folder. And we're going to select our base projectile, and we're going to right click and create a child blueprint class. And we'll call this shotgun projectile underscore BP. And we'll go ahead and open up our shotgun projectile. And we'll see that we have the standard tracer for our assault rifle here. So I'm going to go ahead and select our particle system. And under template here, I'm going to search for the pistol. And we're going to select the pistol tracer light. And I'm going to go ahead and line this up with our collision capsule. And we actually changed the scaling a little bit here. So I'm going to set this to a 0.25 scale across the board. And then once again, I'll just realign it so that the head of it sits within the collision capsule. And we can go ahead and compile and save this. And we can close out of our projectile. So in our base enemy character here, when we spawn it, under select class, we'll search for the shotgun projectile blueprint. And then we'll connect our projectile spawn info into our spawn transform. For collision handling override, we're going to always spawn ignore collisions. And then for the instigator, I'm going to right click and we're going to search for self. And we're going to get a reference to the self and plug that into our instigator. Now from our spawn actor shotgun projectile blueprint here, we're going to go ahead and cast this. And for some reason, this is really weird. I don't know why this happens, but sometimes it forces you to cast things and sometimes it doesn't. So this being set up the way it is, if you drag off of the return value and search for cast and you can't find the base weapon blueprint, this return value, if you mouse over it, is a shotgun projectile BP reference. So the reference is already casted too. So what we're going to do is I'm going to drag off of this and we're just going to set damage info. Now, if you drag off of here and you don't get access to the set damage info, you might have to go ahead and cast this to the base projectile first. And I have no real explanation as to why it does or doesn't do this. I can't seem to find a solid answer anyway. So you might have to cast it, you might not. But we're going to have to set the damage info on our projectile here. And our player character right now is doing between 8 and 10 damage. So I'm going to create 2 new variables. And I'm going to call the first one damage min. And I'm going to make it a float. And I'm going to create a second one for the damage max. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag these onto the graph. Now, since we're firing a shotgun burst, it's firing 5 separate projectiles, and we don't want the projectiles to do that 8 to 10 damage. But I want to use these damage min and damage maxes universally. So I'm going to select the damage min. We're going to compile so we can set the defaults. And I'm going to set the damage min default to 8 and the damage max to 10. But we don't want to do the full damage from all the projectiles, because that way you would be doing somewhere around 50 damage per shot if all the shots hit. So we're going to get the shotgun burst count. And we want to divide the damage min and the damage max by the shotgun burst count. So we'll drag off of our damage min and search for the divide, float by float. And we'll plug our shotgun burst count into that divide. And I'll just make some space over here. And we're going to go ahead and copy this divide, plug that into our damage max, and from our converter into the second division. And we'll plug that into our damage min and our damage max. Now, I'm not going to have the enemies do any critical damage to the player, so I'm going to leave that one blank. You can go ahead and, if you want, calculate a critical chance. And then we're going to go back to our for loop. And once this for loop is completed, we want to go ahead and up our fire count. So I'm going to drag out, and we're going to get a reference to our fire count. And we're also going to drag out and set our fire count. And from our for loop here, we're going to drag out from the completed execution pin. And we're going to set our fire count. And we want to set this to our current fire count plus 1. So we'll select integer plus integer and set the second number to 1 and plug that into our fire count. And then finally, we're going to backtrack to our branch. And from the false pin here, I'm going to drag out and I'm going to search for a delay. And I'm going to set the delay to 3 seconds. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead And we want to copy this set fire count. And we want to set the fire count back down to 0. So what we're effectively doing here is when we call on the fire shotgun, we're going to go ahead and perform the shotgun burst. We set up the timer to repeat every 1 second, and we set up a reference to our timer handle. So when the shotgun burst is actually called, it's going to check our fire count, and we want to make sure that the fire count default is set to 0, and it's going to check to see if this is less than 3. If it is less than 3, we're going to go ahead and play our animation, and then we're going to perform a loop based on the burst count. So it will create that number of projectiles and spawn them at the barrel of the weapon. And then for each one inside of the loop body, it's going to calculate the shotgun fire. So that'll provide us with a spawn transform where we will spawn the projectile for the shotgun. And then we're going to go ahead and set the damage for the projectile, which is going to be our damage min and our damage max divided by our shotgun burst count. Once that is completed for the total number of shotgun bursts, it is going to go ahead and increment our fire count plus 1. And if we go back here to our branch, once that gets up to 3, so when he fires 3 times, it's going to travel down this false branch, and it's going to provide a delay for 3 seconds. And after 3 seconds, it's going to go ahead and set the fire count to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all of our shotgun stuff here. I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to put it in a comic box, and we'll call it Fire Shotgun. And now that we have a timer handle, we want to use the stop fire weapon to clear this timer handle and stop the timer from occurring in the event we need to stop firing at any point. So I'm going to drag out and get a reference to our timer handle, and we're going to select this, and we're going to clear timer by handle, and we'll just connect that into our stop fire weapon. Now all the weapons are going to be based off of a timer of some sort, so we can use this timer handle reference for all of the different weapons since they will only fire one type of weapon at any given time. And if we go back up to our damage event here, if we end up killing our actor and destroying it, I'm going to drag this destroy actor out. We actually want to go ahead and call that stop fire weapon so that our character isn't still firing when they die. Now we're going to call this here because we're going to have ragdolling effects that occur, and it's going to take some time for those ragdolling effects to actually happen. So while the events of the ragdoll go on, we want the weapon to stop firing, so we'll call the stop fire weapon before we do anything else like ragdolling. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. And then I'm going to go back over to our attack player BTT. So we're going to grab off of our controlled pawn here, and we're going to go ahead and cast to our base enemy character. And from our base enemy character, we're going to go ahead and drag off, and we're going to set fire weapon. And that will call the event from the graph that fires our weapon. So we'll go ahead and compile and save. And we should be all set at this point to actually have the enemy start shooting stuff. So let's go to our main window, and we'll go ahead and hit play. And we'll see that he's running around with a shotgun. And when he turns around and sees us, he is not actually firing. He is calling the attack player BTT. Oh, and I already see my mistake here in our base enemy character. So we'll stop the simulation, and we'll drag our branch over. And we want to check to make sure our character is not dead. So we'll drag in a not operator, and we'll plug that into our condition. And we'll go ahead and compile and save, and we'll try playing again. So we'll go ahead and we'll get into his line of sight here. And we'll see that he turns at us, he fires 3 times, separated by 1 second, and then waits for 3 seconds and fires again 3 times. And he'll continue to cycle this over and over again until we kill him, or whatever the case is. So we can run away from him and he can pursue us. Now the one thing to note is, at this point he's not actually aiming at us. He's just firing from a forward vector of the weapon. So when I go to correct his movement, I'm going to also correct where he's aiming at. So right now we can stay within that 3 meters and actually walk behind him, and he really can't do anything to us. And now that we're actually starting to get up there in variables within our enemy character, we can actually sort and group our variables together. And an easy way to do this is if you click on the variable, there is in the details pane a category where there's the default and the pawn character, but we can actually type in here and create a new category. So in this case, this is dealing with health. So if we type in health and hit enter, you'll see that there's this new health drop down under variables. So for our max health, I can once again click on the drop down, and we'll see that there's now the health category available to us, and I can set our max health into our health category as well. And we can do that for all kinds of different variables. For example, the is dead, we can put that in health as well. And then for our shotgun variables here, I'm going to go ahead and put them into their own category, and I'm going to call this shotgun. And then we can set the shotgun spread, as well as the shotgun burst count. Anything specific to the shotgun, we can put into that category. Now the damage min and the damage max I'm going to use universally. So I'm not going to put them specifically into the shotgun category. And the fire count as well, I'm going to use that universally, and I'm going to use it differently based on different weapons. So once again, I'm not going to go ahead and put that into any particular category. I guess I will create a new category for the timer handle, and I'm going to call this just weapon. So this will hold our default weapon values, and we can go ahead and put the fire count in there as well. We can put the damage min in there, and the damage max. And of course, you can arrange these however you feel is logical to you. And we can go ahead and compile and save it. And that's going to complete today's video. In the next video, I'm going to address how to get the enemy character to actually point the shotgun at the player character, so he's directly aiming towards him, and we're going to use an aim offset to do that. And we're going to go ahead and make adjustments to his movement blend space in order to get him to walk appropriately based on his speed. If you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. And as always, thanks for watching.